The courtroom was hushed before anyone spoke, not respectful, just tightly wound. It had that kind of stillness you only get when authority and tension occupy the same room, and every observer knows how fast things can spiral. Karoline Leavitt adjusted the hem of her skirt as she strode to the stand. She was here over defamation claims made by Whoopi Goldberg, accusing Karoline of character attacks in a viral interview. The public had seen the headlines, former press secretary sued by talk show icon. But few knew how high the stakes really were. From the judge's bench, the bailiff called the court to order. Whoopi Goldberg sat across the room, dignified but visibly alert. Cameras recorded every nuance. Some faces in the gallery were studious. Others were just watching, hungry for drama. Karoline's opening statement was crisp, intentionally so. She said, "Your Honor, I won't waste your time. 3 weeks ago, I responded to Whoopi Goldberg's own comments about conservative women. My words were chosen carefully. Yes, they were biting. Yes, they were unapologetic. But none of them were false." As Karoline spoke, Whoopi's jaw tightened. The courtroom exhaled, and the tone shifted. The prosecution followed with its own tone, measured, serious. They said, "Ms. Leavitt implied that Ms. Goldberg lacked intelligence, character, and integrity on a public platform. We intend to prove those statements aren't merely opinion." Karoline's lips curved into a measured smile. She replied, "I stand by my words. My opinions are my own. That is the difference between a safe space and free speech." Before the judge could intervene, Karoline leaned forward and addressed Whoopi directly. "Your reputation is well-earned, Ms. Goldberg. But reputation isn't invulnerability." The audience shifted in their seats. A ripple of shock went through the courtroom. Then Karoline paused, locked eyes with Whoopi, and said, "I may be the defendant here, but you're the one whose words started this legal dance." The courtroom held its breath. And now, before things go deeper than even the judge expected, before soundbites get clipped, and before this entire case is sanitized for public appeal, I need to say this. You're about to witness what happens when someone neither asked for respect nor permission, but got both in the same moment. If you want to see the unfiltered moment when opinion turns legal and boldness turns into reckoning, subscribe now. Because what happens next isn't just court procedure. It's a collision. The judge cleared his throat, trying to settle the courtroom. "Let's proceed with testimony," he said, voice firm but cautious. He knew what was coming. Everyone did. Whoopi's legal team called their first witness, a producer from The View who had worked closely with both women. The producer testified that Karoline's comments had damaged Whoopi's credibility and caused internal turmoil at the network. Karoline listened without flinching. When it was her turn to respond, she stood calmly and asked, "Was Whoopi's credibility damaged by my words? Or by the words she's repeated, unchallenged, for the last decade?" The courtroom was silent. The witness didn't reply. Karoline said, "I was invited onto The View to speak about policy. Instead, I was asked about my lipstick, my clothes, and whether I even belonged at the table. I didn't mock Whoopi Goldberg. I resisted the mockery she unleashed first." Whoopi leaned toward her attorney, whispering something that was clearly not meant for the cameras. But a lip reader in the front row turned to a reporter and mouthed. She just said, "This girl's playing victim again." When Karoline heard about that comment moments later, mid-testimony, she didn't raise her voice. She just smiled again. Cold, controlled. She said, "This isn't about hurt feelings. It's about what happens when a woman refuses to nod quietly while being ridiculed by people with bigger stages." The judge tapped his pen, but let her continue. Karoline looked at the jury. "I'm not on trial for lying. I'm on trial for speaking too clearly for their comfort." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Whoopi's attorney objected. "She's grandstanding." But the judge overruled. "Let her speak." And in that moment, Karoline turned not just toward the judge or the jury, but toward the crowd. She said, "You can dislike what I said, but don't mistake disagreement for defamation. She returned to her seat, her expression unreadable. The judge called for a recess, and the crowd didn't move. Not right away, because the power had shifted. During recess, the courtroom buzzed like a hive. Reporters leaned into their phones. Commentators whispered into tiny mics. And somewhere near the back, a woman in a gray coat said, "This isn't a trial anymore. This is a reckoning." Karoline returned to her seat before the bailiff even called order. Whoopi, however, lingered in the hallway. She was talking to her publicist, gesturing sharply. She didn't expect Karoline to fight back this hard, or this effectively. When the court resumed, Whoopi took the stand. Her voice was even, calculated. She said, "I've been in this business for decades, and I've faced my share of criticism. But there's a difference between critique and contempt." Karoline crossed that line. Karoline's attorney didn't flinch. "Can you specify how she defamed you?" Whoopi responded. "She implied I don't think conservative women are intelligent. She mocked me for allegedly silencing opposing views. She painted me as someone incapable of tolerance." The lawyer asked, "Did you say during a previous episode of The View that young conservative women were cute but clueless?" Whoopi hesitated, then said, "It was a joke taken out of context." Karoline looked directly at her. She said, "You turned my beliefs into a punchline, and now you're surprised the punchline hit back." Gasps echoed softly. Whoopi's lawyer objected again. "Your Honor, this is disrespectful." The judge replied, "It's relevant." Karoline stood. "They call it mockery when I fight back. They call it class when Whoopi does it. I don't mind being held to a standard, so long as it's the same one." Whoopi leaned back, arms folded. Karoline stepped toward the jury box and added, "She mocked me. I mocked her back. But now I'm on trial. Not for lying, but for not backing down." Silence. And in that stillness, Karoline closed her notebook and said, "You don't get to humiliate people, then sue them for responding." The judge looked down, quietly marking his notes. Because in that courtroom, the case was shifting. By the fourth day of the trial, the courtroom had become a microcosm of something far bigger. The air wasn't just tense anymore. It was divided. Every sentence was a line drawn. Every glance, a verdict waiting to be declared. Whoopi's team began their closing push with a media expert on the stand. The expert testified that Karoline's comments had gone beyond commentary and had led to real-world consequences: hate messages, threats, and online abuse. Karoline sat still, hands folded. When it was her turn to cross-examine, she walked slowly to the stand. She asked, "Are you saying people can't disagree strongly without being held responsible for other people's behavior?" The expert replied, "I'm saying you amplified hostility." Karoline nodded. "And if I disagreed respectfully, would that hostility have disappeared?" The expert didn't answer. Karoline leaned closer. Or would it just have gotten ignored? The courtroom was silent again. Then Karoline turned to the judge. She said, "I didn't call Whoopi a criminal. I didn't call her dishonest. I said she was dismissive. And the tape backs that up." She paused, then added, "But here's the real question. If a liberal woman had said those same things about me, would we be here today?" Whoopi shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Karoline walked back to her table. Her attorney rose. "No further questions, Your Honor." The judge called for closing statements. Whoopi's attorney spoke first. He recited the damage done, the supposed intent, the weight of public figures wielding influence. It was polished, precise, carefully rehearsed. Karoline's team spoke last. Her attorney said, "Words are powerful, but so is silence." And Karoline Leavitt refused to be silent when mocked on national television. He pointed to the jury. "Ask yourselves not if her words were uncomfortable, but if they were untrue." And with that, the trial drew to a close. The judge announced that the jury would reconvene the next morning. Karoline stood, looked toward the back of the courtroom, then toward Whoopi, and for the first time since the trial began, she said nothing. She didn't have to. The jury returned just before noon. 12 people, carrying more than their own conclusions. They carried the full weight of a culture war that neither side had asked to lead, but both had chosen to confront. The judge asked if they had reached a verdict. The foreperson nodded. They handed over the slip of paper. The judge unfolded it slowly. His eyes scanned the verdict, then lifted toward the room. In the matter of Goldberg versus Leavitt, he read, "We find in favor of the defendant." A collective exhale filled the courtroom, half in shock, half in disbelief. Whoopi Goldberg's mouth parted slightly. No outburst. No immediate reaction. Just stillness. Karoline stood, straight-backed, and remained quiet. The judge turned to her. "Ms. Leavitt, you are cleared of all defamation charges. Court is adjourned." The gavel fell, and then the storm broke. Reporters scrambled from their seats. Phones went live. People began shouting questions, first to Whoopi, then to Karoline, then to each other. But Karoline didn't speak. Not yet. She walked through the courtroom slowly, deliberately, and exited into the hallway where a wall of cameras waited. She stopped only once. A young woman in the front row whispered, "Thank you for not backing down." Karoline looked at her and said, "That's how they win. When we stop talking." Then she stepped up to the microphones. "I didn't come here to win anything," she said. "I came to defend the principle that free speech includes the uncomfortable, the inconvenient, and the unapologetic." She looked out into the crowd. If we live in a world where opinions are judged in courtrooms, then justice becomes a popularity contest. Reporters kept asking, "Do you have a message for Whoopi?" Karoline paused, then said, "Yes. I hope she uses her platform to uplift, not undermine. And I hope she understands now that conservative women aren't just guests to tolerate. We're voices that matter." And with that, Karoline walked away from the podium. The battle was over, but something bigger had just begun. In the days that followed, the verdict dominated every screen, feed, and thread. But it wasn't the legal victory that captured the country's attention. It was what Karoline Leavitt represented to so many, and what Whoopi Goldberg had exposed without meaning to. Clips of the trial circulated with millions of views. Not just the verdict, but the moments of quiet defiance. The words Karoline had chosen. The pauses she let linger. And above all, the moment she said, "You don't get to humiliate people, then sue them for responding." That sentence echoed. It was quoted by commentators across the spectrum. Some praised it as a wake-up call. Others dismissed it as political theater. But nobody ignored it. Karoline didn't do a media tour. She didn't take a victory lap. Instead, she released a single video from her living room. No makeup, no lights, just clarity. She said, "This wasn't about Whoopi. This wasn't about me. It was about how power responds when it's questioned, especially by someone they didn't expect to push back." She continued, "If you're a young woman in America, left, right, or center, you deserve to speak without being labeled. And you deserve to fight back without being punished for it." The video ended with one line. "I didn't mock Whoopi. I mirrored her. And she didn't like what she saw." Meanwhile, Whoopi returned to The View 3 days later. She tried to open the show with a joke. "Well, that went great, didn't it?" But the laughter was thinner, the audience quieter, and the conversation never quite returned to normal. Sponsors didn't drop out, but the show's tone shifted. Because once you've been called out in court, not for lying, but for condescension, the spotlight doesn't feel the same. Karoline went on to build something quieter, but deeper. A podcast, a new organization for women in media, a platform that didn't rely on shouting, but didn't shy from truth. And every time someone said she had gone too far, she would quote that one moment in court. "You don't get to humiliate people, then sue them for responding." That wasn't defiance. That was a boundary.